I need to see him right now.
Back off! I'm not letting you near him!
I didn't even hear the front door open until I felt a shadow stretch across Ethan's bedroom floor. Vanessa Caldwell, or the board chair, or however she wanted to style herself today, was crawling across the carpet like some predator, clipboard in hand, eyes scanning every corner. My chest tightened as my gaze locked on her, my son, 7 years old, buried under his blanket, unaware that his sanctuary had just been invaded. "Daniel," she said, voice sharp, condescending, "you know this is against HOA regulations." I swallowed past the surge of anger and didn't move right away. The enforcer in crimson, the tyrant in heels, the clipboard queen. Vanessa Caldwell had no right here, not physically, not morally, but the truth that she didn't know, that she couldn't guess. I kept my hand brushing the grip of my sidearm under my jacket. My military training kicked in. My calm, steady heartbeat hid the storm inside. "Vanessa, you're about to overstep every line," I said, voice quiet, deliberate. Her smirk faltered just slightly, the first crack in her armor. If you've ever felt that surge of protection for someone you love more than life itself, hit subscribe right now. That feeling is everything. "Where are you watching from?" She straightened, clipboard quivering in her hands for a brief second before she regained that icy poise, the tyrant in heels standing taller, as if the room belonged to her. "Daniel, I'm only enforcing the rules," she said. "You know this easement isn't compliant." The words felt hollow, ridiculous, and threatening all at once. The clipboard queen had no idea she was standing in the wrong house, in the wrong room, at the wrong time. I stepped forward, slow but deliberate, letting the tension settle in the space between us. "You might want to back up," I said, calm but unwavering, "not because of me, but because of what you're about to do to my family." That pause, that quiet warning, made her hesitate. The board chair's face tightened, her usual bravado flickering. She had never encountered someone who would challenge her at the very moment she thought she was untouchable. My son stirred, half asleep, and I crouched beside him, putting my hand over his small shoulder. The violation of his safety was enough to ignite something primal inside me. The enforcer in crimson might have thought this was just another rule to enforce, another form to wield like a weapon. But she had underestimated a veteran's instinct to protect his own. I wasn't just a neighbor. I was someone who had faced real threats, and I wasn't going to let a clipboard queen turn my son's bedroom into a battlefield. She stepped closer, her heels clicking on the hardwood floor, the tyrant in heels' presence heavy and suffocating. "I'm authorized," Vanessa Caldwell said, voice rising. "You'll answer to the board if you—" I cut her off with a firm hand pointing toward the hallway. "Authorized? Maybe. But not legal. Not here. Not like this. Not in my house. Not to him." The pause that followed was electric, every second stretched as if the walls themselves were holding their breath. My military training, my years of preparation for crises, collided with my fatherly instinct. I didn't flinch. I didn't hesitate. I simply watched her, measured every twitch, every subtle shift in posture. And in that moment, I knew the scales had tilted, even if just a fraction, in my favor. This wasn't about paperwork, property lines, or HOA overreach. This was about sanctuary, innocence, and the line that no one, no board chair, no clipboard queen, no enforcer in crimson, should ever cross. And as her eyes darted toward the door, calculating her exit or her next move, I realized something else. The confrontation had just begun, but I was ready. And Ethan's safety? That was non-negotiable. The next morning, the weight of Vanessa Caldwell's intrusion hung over the neighborhood like a storm cloud. Across the cul-de-sac, whispers had already started. Parents exchanged cautious glances, neighbors shook their heads behind closed doors, and I felt the sting of watching the clipboard queen's reach extend beyond my own home. The board chair didn't just threaten my sanctuary, she was attempting to intimidate everyone who dared to live with boundaries in this carefully controlled community. Every lawn, every driveway, every front porch suddenly felt like a potential battlefield. Vanessa Caldwell had a way of making rules feel personal. The enforcer in crimson strutted through meetings like she owned them, waving papers and citations with a practiced smirk. At the HOA office, she had left a trail of fear in her wake. The tyrant in heels wasn't just targeting me. Her focus seemed to extend to anyone who dared to question her authority, anyone who challenged the rigid, suffocating order she demanded. I could see it in the faces of the neighbors: unease, worry, frustration. They didn't know how far she would go. By mid-morning, the first of her formal warnings appeared in mailboxes. Vanessa Caldwell had crafted them with precision, citing obscure covenants and neighborhood regulations, wielding them like weapons. The clipboard queen had a reputation for meticulous documentation, and yet beneath that careful exterior there was a certain recklessness that only someone with unchecked power could cultivate. Her letters weren't just notices, they were veiled threats, designed to make the residents second-guess their every decision, from garden fences to mailbox colors. I walked through the neighborhood, observing the subtle changes she had inspired. A fresh coat of paint on one home, questioned; a flower bed slightly over the line, reported. The enforcer in crimson thrived on scrutiny, and the community had become a theater of tension. It wasn't just my home, it was everyone's sense of safety, freedom, and dignity that hung in the balance. I could see why she had chosen my family as the first target. My military background and visible confidence made me the most dangerous neighbor in her eyes, and that, ironically, gave her the thrill of escalation. Later, I met Laura Simmons, a neighbor and a volunteer on the HOA committee. She was quiet, hesitant, clearly conflicted. The board chair's influence had put her in an impossible position. She wanted to enforce the rules, yes, but her conscience had started whispering doubts. The clipboard queen had a way of appearing inescapable, a shadow over everyone's choices. As we spoke briefly in the driveway, I sensed her internal struggle. She was one of the few who might understand the limits of Vanessa Caldwell's authority, and more importantly, one of the few who could tip the scales if she chose to act. By afternoon, the enforcer in crimson escalated further. I noticed her watching from a distance, her sharp heels clicking against the pavement as she monitored who was outside, who might be questioning her orders. The tyrant in heels moved like a predator, scanning for weakness, hoping for an overt display of fear or compliance. I could see it all: the intimidation, the performance, the fear she cultivated, but I refused to let it shake me. My son's safety, our home, and the principle of lawful authority mattered more than any psychological game she played. I returned inside, placing a hand on Ethan's shoulder. His eyes held a mixture of confusion and trust. This was the moment that solidified my resolve. The clipboard queen could attempt to dominate the streets with threats and citations, but I had tools she could never anticipate: my training, my knowledge of legal boundaries, and my readiness to call on outside authority if necessary. Vanessa Caldwell could try to make everyone second-guess their decisions, but she hadn't yet learned that some lines, once crossed, could trigger consequences far beyond her calculations. As dusk settled over the neighborhood, the board chair remained a looming presence, her shadow cast long over every yard. The enforcer in crimson thought her reign absolute, yet every step she took, every citation she issued was drawing more attention. The tyrant in heels might have believed she was untouchable, but even the strongest predators can miscalculate, and I, standing firm, knew that her next move would be the one that finally revealed her overreach to everyone she sought to control. By the next morning, the tension in the neighborhood had thickened like fog. Vanessa Caldwell, the board chair, was already at the forefront of every whispered conversation. Her presence was unavoidable, her authority suffocating. The enforcer in crimson had left no stone unturned in her pursuit of compliance, and every neighbor seemed caught between fear and frustration. I noticed Laura Simmons pacing near the corner lot, glancing nervously toward the clipboard queen, her hands wringing and fingers tapping in restless uncertainty. Her body language spoke volumes, an internal struggle between loyalty to the HOA and the instinct to do what was right. As I approached, Laura's gaze shifted quickly, avoiding direct eye contact, then darting to the driveway where the tyrant in heels had stationed herself. Vanessa Caldwell was speaking with another resident, voice clipped and precise, her tone dripping with authority. Even from a distance, it was easy to see how calculated her intimidation had become. The clipboard queen's eyes scanned the street, searching for signs of defiance, and I could sense the thrill she derived from maintaining control. Laura flinched as the enforcer in crimson adjusted her clipboard, as though each movement carried judgment. The conflicted witness's struggle was subtle but unmistakable. She bit her lip, shifted her weight from foot to foot, and nervously tucked strands of hair behind her ears. Laura's posture alternated between stiff alertness and hesitant retreat, a physical manifestation of the moral tightrope she was walking. Vanessa Caldwell might have assumed complete dominion over her subjects, but here, In Laura's unease, I could see the first cracks forming. The board chair's reign of fear relied on outward compliance, yet the internal conflict simmering in allies like Laura hinted at the vulnerability beneath the polished tyranny. From my vantage point, I observed the enforcer in crimson approaching Laura. The clipboard queen tilted her head, voice low but firm, issuing a directive. Laura flinched visibly, her shoulders tensing, before nodding reluctantly. The tyrant in heels turned her attention to another yard, seemingly unaware of the subtle defiance brewing just a few feet away. This delicate, almost imperceptible tension was critical. It revealed where influence could be shifted, where leverage could be gained, and where the eventual counterstrike might find its foothold. I decided to engage Laura cautiously. My tone was calm but deliberate. "You don't have to follow blindly," I said, careful not to startle her further. Her eyes flickered toward mine, hesitating as though weighing every consequence of even a small nod. Vanessa Caldwell, the enforcer in crimson, and the clipboard queen had trained everyone to fear the repercussions of defiance. But Laura's hesitation revealed she still retained agency, even under surveillance. That brief moment, that flicker of recognition in her gaze, confirmed my suspicion. She could become the key ally we needed if handled correctly. Throughout the morning, the tyrant in heels continued her rounds, her heels clicking sharply against the asphalt, a metronome of intimidation. The board chair had perfected the art of psychological pressure, yet it was in the quiet moments, Laura glancing away, hesitating at a mailbox, shifting uneasily, that the real story unfolded. Her body language spoke louder than any formal warning Vanessa Caldwell could issue, revealing the tension between obligation and conscience. The enforcer in crimson remained oblivious to this subtle defiance, focusing instead on outward appearances of control. By mid-afternoon, I observed Laura taking small actions, a delayed response to a command, a subtle questioning glance at her notes, a hesitant hand hovering over a pen. Each motion was a silent rebellion, a crack in the facade enforced by the clipboard queen. These small, almost invisible cues were proof of her internal conflict, and they were critical for planning the next steps. Vanessa Caldwell, the tyrant in heels, may have believed she had orchestrated absolute obedience, but Laura's struggle hinted at a vulnerability the board chair hadn't anticipated. As the day drew to a close, I knew the key to unraveling the enforcer in crimson's power lay in understanding this tension and leveraging it strategically. Laura's subtle, conflicted movements were a roadmap, a guide to where influence could be exercised without outright confrontation. The clipboard queen's tyranny was built on fear, but fear always leaves gaps. The smallest hesitation can grow into decisive action, and I resolved to watch carefully, waiting for the moment when the conflicted witness would tip the scales in our favor. The next morning brought no relief. Vanessa Caldwell, the board chair, was already circling the neighborhood like a hawk, her eyes sharp, scanning every yard and driveway. The enforcer in crimson had sharpened her presence overnight, clipboard clutched tightly, footsteps crisp against the concrete. Even the smallest deviation from HOA expectations drew a pointed glance, a subtle frown from the clipboard queen that seemed to shrink the air around anyone who dared resist. From the moment I stepped onto the porch, I could feel the tyrant in heels gaze, pressing, relentless, a psychological weight I could almost touch. I noticed Laura Simmons near the mailboxes again, her posture rigid, hands clenched in quiet anxiety. The conflicted witness had grown more cautious after yesterday's observation of Vanessa Caldwell interrogating another neighbor. Each time the board chair passed, the enforcer in crimson reminded Laura of the consequences for stepping out of line. Yet, in her small, deliberate movements, the way she avoided eye contact yet lingered just long enough on irregularities, I saw signs of hesitation, signs that she wasn't entirely conquered. Laura was testing boundaries, subtle but significant, and I knew her internal conflict could soon become our advantage. The clipboard queen approached my property first. Vanessa Caldwell's voice carried across the yard, clipped, authoritative. "This encroachment is illegal. You must remove it immediately." The tyrant in heels' words were as cold as steel, designed to intimidate, to provoke panic. Her stance was unyielding, heels planted firmly like sentinels of compliance. I felt the familiar heat rise in my chest, the protective instinct for my family, for the sanctity of our home, stirring a steady, calm resolve. I met the board chair's gaze directly, refusing to flinch, my own body language radiating quiet strength. The enforcer in crimson circled slowly, surveying the terrain, taking in every detail. Vanessa Caldwell's clipboard clicked with each motion, her presence an unspoken threat. Her eyes, sharp and calculating, seemed to anticipate every countermove before it even occurred. But that observation, that precise control, was also an opening. The tyrant in heels relied on fear, on anticipation, on the assumption that compliance was the only path. I had already noted her predictable rhythms, her obsession with perfection in the HOA's self-proclaimed rules. I called out casually, though my voice carried a tension that made even the clipboard queen pause. "There's more than one way to ensure compliance, Vanessa," I said, testing the waters, planting seeds of doubt. She tilted her head slightly, expression unchanging, yet I caught the brief flicker of annoyance, a crack in her otherwise flawless veneer. The enforcer in crimson's lips pressed thin as she processed the comment, scanning for threat, unaware that the real challenge was not in confrontation, but in subtle disruption. As the morning sun climbed, Vanessa Caldwell moved toward the driveway ramp. The tyrant in heels inspected it as if it were a crime scene, heels clicking against the pavement. My hands flexed at my sides, remembering the personal stakes, the vulnerability of my son's bedroom, the violation of our sanctuary, the very real fear that had surged through my family when the board chair had intruded before. Each step she took was calculated, each note jotted on the clipboard a silent punishment. Yet each movement also left traces, patterns I could use to anticipate the next escalation. Laura lingered nearby, pretending to adjust her gloves, but her eyes were keen, observing everything Vanessa Caldwell did. The conflicted witness's tension radiated like a silent alarm, her indecision a visible struggle against the indoctrination the clipboard queen had imposed. Each hesitant glance, each slight hesitation to follow the enforcer in crimson's orders was a signal. I noted every twitch, every micro-expression, mentally cataloging what could later become leverage. By mid-morning, the board chair moved to address another neighbor's fence, heels clicking like a metronome of oppression. The tyrant in heels had mastered intimidation, yet her obsession with control also made her predictable. Laura's internal conflict simmered, small but critical, a thread we could pull at the perfect moment. The morning had unfolded into a pattern of observation and subtle power plays, and I knew that understanding these movements would shape the coming confrontation. Vanessa Caldwell paused, surveying the street, unaware that her presence had inadvertently exposed vulnerabilities. The enforcer in crimson, clipboard queen, tyrant in heels, all of them had strategies for domination, but strategies also carried habits that could be leveraged. And in Laura's silent hesitations, I saw the first signs that the balance of control could shift. My focus remained fixed on the steps ahead, patience, observation, and using the conflicted witness's inner turmoil to turn the HOA's tyranny into its own undoing. By late afternoon, the tension in the neighborhood had become palpable. Vanessa Caldwell, the board chair, prowled from house to house, her clipboard clutched like a weapon, each motion precise, deliberate. The enforcer in crimson moved in tandem, eyes sharp, scanning for the smallest infraction. The clipboard queen's expressions were unreadable to most, but I noticed every flicker of annoyance, every micro-gesture betraying a rigid mind strained under the weight of imagined authority. My pulse stayed steady, though, knowing the tyranny of heels could be countered, not with force, but with careful, calculated observation. I began a methodical walkthrough of the property, examining the area around my son's bedroom. Vanessa Caldwell had crossed a line, crawling into a space meant to be private, sacred. Each footprint she had left, each fingerprint on the railing, each disruption of the room's order was a clue. The tyrant in heels thought her violation would remain secret, that fear would silence me. But my training as a former military engineer had taught me to notice the invisible. Every angle, every weak point, every procedural oversight became a piece of evidence, each silently screaming that the HOA had overstepped legal boundaries. The enforcer in crimson approached, clipboard poised. "This modification isn't allowed," she said, voice tight, rehearsed, expecting compliance. Vanessa Caldwell lingered behind her, the board chair's eyes scanning for my reaction. As if daring me to challenge her authority, I stood firm, hands visible, posture unyielding, letting them feel the resistance. The clipboard queen had assumed fear would dominate my response, but she underestimated both my skills and my patience. Each movement was a test, a probe, a window into the methodology the HOA relied upon to maintain control. I knelt by the railing, examining the materials, the supports, the angles. My experience with structural systems told me immediately the installation of the ramp was completely compliant with code. I traced every bolt, checked every joint, visualized load distributions. Vanessa Caldwell, the tyrant in heels, was blinded by assumption and arrogance. She had no expertise, yet believed authority alone granted her correctness. Each misstep she made, every minor procedural lapse the clipboard queen ignored or misinterpreted, was a thread I could follow. Professional observation would expose her overreach, and I intended to use it fully. Laura Simmons lingered nearby, pretending to water her garden, but her eyes were wide, scanning my work and the board chair's movements. The conflicted witness's hesitation was apparent in her posture, in the way she half-turned toward Vanessa Caldwell, then back toward me. Every glance, every subtle reaction became data. I noted them all, knowing that the insider's perspective could later provide the crucial testimony that would tip the balance. The enforcer in crimson, focused entirely on intimidation, did not notice the shifting dynamics, a fact I would exploit when the moment came. Vanessa Caldwell crouched slightly, peering at the ramp, clipboard in hand, as if proximity could make her authority real. "You're in violation," she said sharply, attempting to assert control through volume and tone. The tyrant in heels had perfected this ritual, believing that repetition reinforced truth. I met her gaze calmly. "This is fully compliant," I said, letting the certainty in my voice cut through her theatrics. Her frown deepened, annoyance flickering across the clipboard queen's carefully maintained expression. The enforcer in crimson's hands tightened on her clipboard, and for the first time that day, the facade of complete control showed a crack. I continued my systematic inspection, documenting every detail, noting procedural oversights by Vanessa Caldwell, the board chair. Each signature, each missed approval, each deviation from HOA protocol became another piece of leverage. The tyrant in heels had assumed my compliance would be immediate, unquestioning. She had underestimated the advantage that expertise provides in exposing overreach. Every measured step I took, every observation I recorded, brought me closer to setting up the victory strategy that would ultimately restore order and justice. The afternoon sunlight cast long shadows across the property, illuminating not just the ramp, but the growing evidence of the board chair's missteps. Laura's nervous glances hinted at the coming confession, the conflicted witness's silent acknowledgement that the clipboard queen's tyranny could not hold forever. As I wrapped up the inspection, I knew the next phase required careful planning, a sequence of moves designed to capitalize on both the HOA's arrogance and the witness's hesitation. Professional observation had revealed the path forward, and the tyrant in heels remained blissfully unaware that her authority was quietly crumbling. By dusk, the tension on the property had shifted from simmering to a low, palpable roar. Vanessa Caldwell, the board chair, remained a looming presence in the driveway, clipboard tight in her grip, eyes darting from the ramp to me as if daring me to act. The enforcer in crimson hovered nearby, rigid, her heels clicking softly against the pavement, a mechanical accompaniment to the clipboard queen's looming authority. The tyrant in heels had no idea that the professional observation from the previous inspection had already set the stage. Every misstep she had made, every assumption she had relied upon, was recorded meticulously, and I was preparing to turn that silent knowledge into decisive action. The sun dipped low, casting long shadows across the yard, the ramp bathed in golden light. My son had retreated to his room, frightened but safe, the memory of the board chair crawling across the threshold still fresh in his mind. The enforcer in crimson had not noticed him peek from behind the doorframe, tiny eyes wide with alarm. I let a deep breath out, grounding myself. This wasn't just about property rules or HOA politics. It was about family, trust, and the sanctity of private space. Every heartbeat reminded me of the stakes. The tyrant in heels had crossed a line no HOA precedent could justify. I walked deliberately toward Vanessa Caldwell, my boots scuffing softly on the walkway. "This is your last warning," she said sharply, clipboard shaking slightly, an unintentional tremor betraying the growing tension. The board chair's voice, meant to dominate, instead carried a hint of uncertainty. I didn't flinch. My years in the military and professional expertise in structural oversight had taught me to remain calm when chaos threatened. The clipboard queen's authority depended on fear, not knowledge, and I had both certainty and evidence on my side. Behind the chain-link fence, Laura Simmons lingered, hesitant, her hands twisting in the folds of her gardening apron. The conflicted witness, whose loyalty to the HOA had wavered since witnessing the intrusion into my son's room, now subtly shifted closer, eyes darting between the enforcer in crimson and myself. I caught the silent signal. Laura's hesitation would soon become crucial. She could confirm everything Vanessa Caldwell and her tyrant in heels persona had tried to conceal. The professional observation alone was not enough. I needed the insider's acknowledgement to solidify the next phase. I crouched near the ramp, inspecting the anchor bolts again, making mental notes of how the structure met building codes to the letter. "You're bending the rules for personal reasons," Vanessa Caldwell snapped, voice tighter, more strained, as if the very sight of compliance angered her. The enforcer in crimson adjusted her stance, clipboard raised like a shield. The clipboard queen's rigid form did not hide the flicker of uncertainty in her eyes. The tyrant in heels was losing composure without realizing it. Her intimidation tactics had nothing to leverage against methodical evidence and unshakable resolve. Every detail I observed that day added to the mounting proof that the board chair had exceeded her authority. I noted procedural gaps, missing approvals, deviations from standard enforcement protocols, and instances of overreach that a single professional could recognize instantly. Vanessa Caldwell may have believed that stepping into private spaces gave her leverage, but her arrogance blinded her to the fact that the law and professional scrutiny were on my side. Each recorded observation moved me closer to actionable leverage, and the tyrant in heels remained unaware of the trap tightening around her. By early evening, the neighborhood felt tense yet expectant, a subtle shift in atmosphere hinting at the forthcoming confrontation. The conflicted witness, Laura, now closer to the property line, seemed ready to step forward, her body language a mixture of fear and determination. The enforcer in crimson and the clipboard queen remained unaware that the evidence had shifted the balance, that their intimidation had no standing against verified observation and legal compliance. Vanessa Caldwell, the board chair, was about to discover that professionalism, patience, and strategy outweighed unchecked authority. The golden light faded, replaced by the soft glow of street lamps. I felt a surge of resolve. The ramp was solid, my family was safe for now, and the tyrant in heels overreach had been fully documented. The stage was set for the next moves. Professional observation had revealed the vulnerabilities, and the HOA's arrogance would soon be confronted with undeniable reality. Action was imminent. The morning air was crisp, carrying the faint hum of traffic beyond the cul-de-sac. But tension clung to the neighborhood like a stubborn fog. I spotted Laura Simmons hesitating at the edge of the driveway, glancing toward the board chair with cautious urgency. Vanessa Caldwell stood rigid, clipboard in hand, her eyes darting over the ramp. The enforcer in crimson flanking her like a silent sentinel. The clipboard queen had perfected the art of intimidation, but now, the tyrant in heels was unaware that her grip on power was about to weaken from within. Laura approached slowly, each step a quiet rebellion against Vanessa Caldwell's authority. Her hands trembled, betraying the inner turmoil that had been building since the night of the intrusion into my son's room. The conflicted witness, whose loyalty had wavered after seeing the board chair crawl across a private threshold, now seemed ready to act. Her eyes met mine briefly, a silent confirmation that she would provide what I needed. The enforcer in crimson shifted, heels clicking sharply, and Vanessa Caldwell's gaze followed, still unaware of the silent betrayal brewing under her watch. I gestured subtly toward the ramp, indicating that Laura should speak, and she stepped forward, voice barely above a whisper at first. She, Vanessa Caldwell, went into the house, into the bedroom, she admitted, the words trembling but unmistakable. The board chair froze, clipboard lowering slightly, a flash of shock crossing her face. The tyrant in heels' perfect composure faltered for a split second, giving me the opening I had been waiting for. The clipboard queen's eyes darted toward her enforcer, who tensed like a coiled spring, realizing the control they thought they had was slipping. Laura continued, her voice gaining strength with each sentence. I saw it happen. You have to understand, it wasn't authorized. She, Vanessa Caldwell, crossed boundaries, rules, private property. Her confession was careful yet definitive, revealing the overreach that had gone unchecked. The enforcer in Crimson's jaw tightened, but there was nothing she could do. The evidence was now reinforced by first-hand acknowledgement. The board chair, the tyrant in heels, and the clipboard queen were all facing a challenge that their authority could not easily dismiss. I took a step closer, calm but deliberate, feeling the shift in power. "Laura, thank you," I said quietly, more to anchor her courage than for Vanessa Caldwell to hear. The board chair's eyes narrowed, scanning the driveway, perhaps sensing the imbalance, but not yet able to address it. My professional observation had identified procedural violations, but Laura's testimony transformed those observations into undeniable proof. The tyrant in heels had overestimated control, underestimating the silent witnesses who could now turn the tide. Vanessa Caldwell's lips pressed into a thin line, clipboard shaking ever so slightly. The clipboard queen's rigid posture betrayed tension, and the enforcer in Crimson's stance wavered. Laura's admission had activated a ripple effect. The HOA's overreach, once intimidating in isolation, now stood exposed. Every minor procedural misstep, every intrusion into private space, had suddenly acquired real consequences. The board chair's aura of unassailable power was fracturing in real time, and the tyrant in heels appeared cornered, yet unwilling to yield. I allowed a measured pause, letting the significance settle. Neighbors began to peek from behind curtains and blinds, curious, alert. The professional observation, combined with direct witnessing from Laura, had created a dual layer of accountability. Vanessa Caldwell's authority, previously reinforced by intimidation and appearance, was now vulnerable to scrutiny and potential legal consequences. The clipboard queen's confidence waned, the enforcer in Crimson's rigidity softened, and the tyrant in heels' dominance teetered. Laura stepped fully into the light, her body straightening, hands unclenching. Her internal struggle had ended, her confession complete. Vanessa Caldwell, the board chair, had just lost her shield of unquestioned authority. The combination of first-hand admission and professional observation had shifted the dynamics irrevocably. Every step she had taken to intimidate now backfired. Every whispered threat was rendered impotent. The stage was set for the next phase. My counterplan, armed with evidence and reinforced by ally testimony, could finally move into action. I nodded to Laura, gratitude in my eyes, silently acknowledging the courage she had mustered. Vanessa Caldwell, clipboard in hand, still glared, but the power balance had shifted. The tyrant in heels would soon learn that overreach always carries consequences, especially when professional expertise meets decisive testimony. Every observation I had recorded, combined with Laura's confirmation, formed the bedrock for the HOA's undoing. The sun was low over the cul-de-sac, casting long, distorted shadows across the manicured lawns as I retreated to my home office, the battlefield of minds rather than muscle. Vanessa Caldwell's glare lingered in my thoughts, the board chair's overconfidence now bruised by Laura's admission. The enforcer in Crimson's heels clicked down the driveway as if signaling a delayed retaliation, and the clipboard queen's rigid posture haunted the edges of my mind. I needed a plan that was precise, undeniable, and impossible for the tyrant in heels to anticipate. I spread blueprints across the desk, highlighting the house's perimeter, entrances, and line of sight from neighbors' windows. Every angle mattered. Every weak point the board chair had overlooked could become leverage. I reviewed the HOA's rules, memorized the clauses they misused, and cross-referenced them with local municipal codes. Vanessa Caldwell might have believed the clipboard queen's authority was absolute, but she had underestimated the combination of experience and methodical strategy. My professional expertise wasn't just technical, it was the foundation for exposing her overreach. Laura had left a quiet note on my desk, a simple line: "I can show more if needed." I imagined the conflicted witness observing the board chair's moves, ready to validate each calculated step. The enforcer in Crimson's rigid loyalty would falter once the sequence was executed, and the tyrant in heels' public persona could crumble under scrutiny. Vanessa Caldwell had forced her hand into private spaces, a decision with consequences I now planned to magnify. I pulled up the neighborhood security footage, the digital investigation method I had relied on before. My eyes scanned each timestamp, each frame, recording minute details, the board chair lingering too long near my driveway, the clipboard queen peering over fences, the enforcer in Crimson pacing with pointed intent. Every movement would be important. Every overstep became a piece of the puzzle, a single thread I could tug to unravel the illusion of control Vanessa Caldwell maintained. Then I began drafting the counter strategy. First, compile all evidence from professional observation, digital records, and Laura's testimony. Second, map out public exposure, positioning the board chair's overreach in plain view of the community and authorities. Third, ensure that the tyrant in heels could not manipulate perception. Timing, optics, and the precise presentation of facts were everything. Vanessa Caldwell might be calculating, but the clipboard queen and the enforcer in crimson were human, prone to panic under pressure. I rehearsed my statements aloud, voice calm but deliberate, imagining the confrontation at the next HOA meeting. You misused your authority. You intruded where you had no right. The words felt powerful when spoken, each one a strike against the board chair's pretense of invincibility. I rotated my attention to the symbols of the emotional stakes, the bedroom where privacy had been violated, the hallways where the tyrant in heels' presence had created fear. The preparation wasn't just technical, it was psychological, a way to reclaim safety and dignity. Every step of this plan had to appear organic, unavoidable, and undeniable. Vanessa Caldwell would never expect the confluence of testimony, digital evidence, and strategic timing. The enforcer in crimson could be distracted, misled, and exposed, while the clipboard queen's rigid loyalty would fracture under the weight of documented overreach. I imagined the public witness reactions, the neighborhood collectively recognizing that the board chair's authority had been abused. Each calculated action was a chess move, designed to corner the tyrant in heels without direct confrontation. By nightfall, the counterplan was fully formed, notes were organized, evidence verified, and mental rehearsals complete. I knew when the execution began, Vanessa Caldwell would realize too late that her tyranny relied solely on intimidation and secrecy. The enforcer in crimson and the clipboard queen would follow the crumbling authority, and Laura's confession would serve as the keystone. The stage was set for a decisive, strategically flawless execution that would restore control, safeguard my family, and expose the board chair's overreach in a way that could not be ignored. Every element aligned: the digital records, professional observation, conflicted witness, and strategic timing, all waiting for the signal. The tyrant in heels thought she had mastered the game, but the board chair's empire of intimidation was about to meet a calculated, unyielding counterforce. The next morning, the neighborhood seemed calm, deceptively quiet, as if the streets themselves were holding their breath. I moved carefully through the driveway, checking sightlines, positioning, and potential witnesses. Vanessa Caldwell's name lingered in my mind. The board chair had no idea that today's actions would begin dismantling her carefully constructed authority. The enforcer in crimson patrolled the adjacent lawns, unaware that her every step was being logged and mapped. Even the clipboard queen, with her habitual meticulous notes, would soon realize that the tyrant in heels' grip was slipping. I met Laura at the community park, our rendezvous chosen for privacy and accessibility. Her conflicted gaze betrayed the internal struggle I had observed before, the hesitation that comes from loyalty clashing with conscience. "Are you ready?" I asked quietly, scanning the playground for potential onlookers. Laura nodded, and I handed her a small, encrypted drive containing the compiled digital evidence, footage, timestamps, and professional analysis showing the board chair's repeated overreach. The enforcer in crimson's habitual vigilance could not protect Vanessa Caldwell from what was coming. We moved on to canvassing a few neighbors, professional observation combined with community intelligence. I spoke carefully, framing questions as casual inquiries about recent HOA behavior. "Have you noticed any unusual entries into private property?" My tone was conversational yet deliberate. Behind each interaction, the clipboard queen's presence in the minds of our neighbors was unavoidable. People had already witnessed small injustices, but now they had the framework to recognize the larger pattern. Vanessa Caldwell thought her intimidation kept everyone silent, but the tyrant in heels underestimated the human instinct to speak when given validation. Returning home, I set up my equipment, cameras positioned for full coverage of the front yard, sensor triggers aligned with approach paths, and backup storage secured. Every technical detail mattered. Professional expertise was the foundation of this victory strategy. The board chair's overconfidence, the enforcer in crimson's predictable routines, and the clipboard queen's obsessive record-keeping were now tools in my favor. Each weakness became an asset, each predictable habit a lever to shift the balance of power. I reviewed every timestamp from prior footage, highlighting moments where Vanessa Caldwell had violated HOA protocols. The tyrant in heels believed in secrecy and fear, yet the data made her transparent. Laura's confession was now supported with concrete proof, ensuring credibility. The enforcer in Crimson's loyalty, which had seemed unshakable, could be redirected subtly through exposure and logical consequence. Every step in this preparation reinforced the inevitability of the board chair's accountability. Neighbors became unwitting allies in small ways, confirming that the clipboard queen had approached multiple properties without proper notification, that the enforcer in Crimson had lingered where she had no right, that Vanessa Caldwell had crossed boundaries repeatedly. The pieces fit together like a puzzle, each observation and testimony converging toward the decisive moment. I rotated my attention among these elements, ensuring that each action would be observable, verifiable, and undeniable when executed. By afternoon, the counterplan was fully staged. Every line of defense for the board chair was accounted for. Every predictable move by the enforcer in Crimson was mapped, and the clipboard queen's rigid adherence to procedure became an unwitting ally in exposing the tyrant in heels. Vanessa Caldwell had no inkling of the precision waiting behind her overconfidence. Each neighbor, each witness, and each technical measure ensured that the upcoming confrontation would be thorough, unassailable, and publicly visible. As the sun dipped, I revisited the symbolic center of the conflict, my son's bedroom, the room that had been violated, the trigger of all these meticulous preparations. Standing there, I felt the weight of responsibility and the potential for justice. Vanessa Caldwell's audacity had created the opening. The board chair's miscalculations were now evidence, and the enforcer in Crimson and Clipboard Queen were moving unknowingly toward validation of wrongdoing. Everything was aligned. Tomorrow, the strategy would shift from preparation to execution. The board chair, the enforcer in Crimson, the Clipboard Queen, and the tyrant in heels would all face the consequences of actions meticulously documented, precisely timed, and publicly undeniable. The neighborhood, our community, and my family's safety hung on this delicate orchestration, and I was ready. Dawn broke over the neighborhood, sharp and clear, and with it, the day of reckoning began. I checked the perimeter one last time, ensuring every sensor, every camera, and every digital alert was functioning perfectly. Vanessa Caldwell had no idea that her predictable morning routine, inspection of front lawns, casual strides past the playground, habitual stops at certain mailboxes, was being watched, logged, and timed to the second. The board chair believed her intimidation and familiarity with the residents made her untouchable. The enforcer in Crimson patrolled as usual. The Clipboard Queen hovered at the edges of her territory, and the tyrant in heels exuded confidence. But all their certainty was about to unravel. I positioned myself in the front yard, out of immediate view, but within full operational reach. Laura had confirmed her part. Neighbor confirmations, subtle observations, and digital records were ready. Her conflicted allegiance had shifted fully toward justice, giving me a silent partner who understood both the stakes and the power of evidence. Every move the Clipboard Queen made would now be mirrored. Every overstep of the enforcer in Crimson documented. Vanessa Caldwell's arrogance made her predictable. The tyrant in heels had never anticipated being observed with such methodical scrutiny. Across the street, a few early morning neighbors were stirring, unaware they were about to witness a showdown that would redefine the balance of authority in the community. I mentally reviewed the sequence. Every camera angle, every motion sensor, every recorded interaction. Each detail was calibrated so that when Vanessa Caldwell approached my property or engaged in her usual intrusive inspections, the consequences would be unavoidable. The enforcer in Crimson, loyal to habit, would be inadvertently exposed. The Clipboard Queen's meticulous note-taking would backfire, and the board chair herself would be rendered transparent before the watching eyes of the community. I heard the faint crunch of footsteps on the gravel drive. Vanessa Caldwell, the board chair, was surveying my property as usual, her sharp heels clicking, clipboard in hand. She squinted at the perimeter, probably thinking she could intimidate through presence alone. The enforcer in Crimson flanked her, casting occasional glances in my direction, unaware of the prepared traps. The tyrant in heels exuded certainty, a dangerous combination of boldness and ignorance. I activated the first sensor. A subtle alert pinged through my monitoring system. Cameras zoomed in on the approach, capturing precise movement. The digital evidence was accumulating in real time, flawless and undeniable. Across the street, Laura gave me a small nod. Her neighbor confirmations were in place, subtly corroborating each minor violation by Vanessa Caldwell and her enforcers. Every intrusion she made, every overreach, would now be framed with credible witness support. The clipboard queen's meticulous documentation became part of the proof, the enforcer in Crimson's routine positioning, recorded and time-stamped, and the board chair's arrogance caught perfectly on film. As Vanessa Caldwell approached the symbolic center, the doorway to my son's bedroom, the emotional epicenter of this conflict, my pulse quickened. This was the moment the preparation intersected with execution. I ensured that each technical measure, each witness, and each observational tool was synchronized. The neighborhood itself became a silent participant, birds startled by the commotion, early joggers observing without interference, and subtle noises amplifying the tension. Every calculated step brought the board chair closer to accountability. The enforcer in crimson, moving predictably, could not deviate. The clipboard queen, obsessively noting details, contributed to her own exposure. The tyrant in heels had unwittingly stepped into a perfect trap. The stage was set for public confrontation, but today was the moment of final positioning when each piece fell into place. Vanessa Caldwell had unknowingly triggered the very mechanisms that would dismantle her control. By mid-morning, all elements were aligned. Every sensor, camera, neighbor observation, and digital record created an unbreakable chain of evidence. Vanessa Caldwell, the enforcer in crimson, the clipboard queen, and the tyrant in heels were poised for exposure. The front yard, once a battleground of intimidation, now represented preparation, precision, and the inevitability of justice. Tomorrow, the confrontation would be unavoidable. Today, positioning was everything. The community hall was packed, every folding chair filled, the air thick with anticipation. I stepped in quietly, surveying the room, neighbors whispering, cameras discreetly angled, and the tension of impending confrontation practically vibrating off the walls. Vanessa Caldwell, the board chair, stood at the podium with her clipboard queen poised beside her, the enforcer in crimson lurking in the corner, and the tyrant in heels radiating smug confidence. She had no idea the game had already shifted. Every violation she'd committed, every intimidation tactic had been documented, time-stamped, and verified. "Good morning, everyone," Vanessa Caldwell started, voice smooth but sharp, trying to command authority. The enforcer in crimson adjusted her stance behind the board chair, scanning the crowd like a silent sentinel. The clipboard queen made notes with her usual intensity, while the tyrant in heels arched an eyebrow, confident this would all end in her favor. But the room's energy was different today. Neighbors who had been silent were watching me, watching the sequence unfold, waiting for the truth. I stepped forward, heart steady, voice calm but resonant. "Vanessa Caldwell, the board chair, you've overstepped your authority." The words carried weight, sharp and undeniable. I triggered the first visual evidence, projecting clips of her entering my son's bedroom, her intrusive motions, the enforcer in crimson hovering. Gasps spread through the audience. The clipboard queen's meticulous notes were highlighted, revealing the timeline of violations. The tyrant in heels froze for a second, eyes flicking nervously toward the screen. Neighbors leaned in, murmurs spreading quickly. Each image, each timestamp dismantled the aura of control Vanessa Caldwell had built. The enforcer in crimson shifted uneasily. The clipboard queen's hand froze mid-note. Even the tyrant in heels hesitated, realizing the balance had tipped. My voice remained steady. "This isn't opinion. This is documented, corroborated by witnesses and digital proof. Every action was recorded, every overreach verified." Laura, the conflicted witness, stepped forward quietly, her confirmation subtle but powerful. "I observed the incidents," she said, her eyes meeting Vanessa Caldwell's. The board chair's jaw tightened. The enforcer in crimson's posture stiffened, the clipboard queen's pen stopped moving, and the tyrant in heels faltered under the scrutiny of the community. Every ally Vanessa Caldwell had relied on was now inadvertently amplifying her exposure. Projected on the large screen were side-by-side comparisons of claimed HOA authority versus the documented evidence. The enforcer in crimson, accustomed to intimidation, could no longer intimidate. The clipboard queen's obsessive notes betrayed the timeline, and the tyrant in heel's confidence began to crack. The neighbors' whispers transformed into unified murmurs of disbelief and outrage. The board chair's carefully maintained image of control crumbled in real time, and every misstep, every encroachment became undeniable. Vanessa Caldwell tried to interject, "This is not," but my voice cut through, calm but commanding. "You exceeded your authority, entered a private home, and endangered a family. Your actions violated every principle of trust and law this community depends on." The enforcer in crimson glanced toward her silently. The clipboard queen glanced down at her notes in disbelief, and the tyrant in heels shifted uneasily. One by one, neighbors spoke, confirming their observations. The community's collective voice turned the tide. The board chair's authority, built over years, disintegrated under scrutiny, while the evidence, my preparation, Laura's support, and careful documentation sealed the accountability. By the end, Vanessa Caldwell's face revealed the first true glimpse of vulnerability, her usual poise replaced by shock and helplessness. As the session concluded, the sense of justice was palpable. The enforcer in crimson slunk back, the clipboard queen lowered her pen, and the tyrant in heels accepted the inevitability of exposure. The board chair's reign was effectively dismantled, and the room was left with a restored balance of fairness and oversight. My position, calm and prepared, had transformed a crisis into absolute accountability. The courtroom felt impossibly quiet after the chaos of the board meeting, the tension lingering like smoke. Vanessa Caldwell, the board chair, sat stiffly in the corner, the clipboard queen beside her scribbling furiously. The enforcer in crimson slouched with a rare uncertainty, and the tyrant in heels tapping impatiently on her knee. Outside, the sun poured into the neighborhood streets, signaling a day that would be remembered. I exhaled slowly, letting the weight of what had just transpired sink in. Justice wasn't instantaneous, but it had arrived in waves, undeniable and methodical. I walked past the seats where neighbors had gathered, shaking hands, sharing quiet words of gratitude. Each interaction reminded me why this had been so crucial, not for revenge, but for protection, for the restoration of trust in our community. Vanessa Caldwell's glare followed me, sharp yet powerless. Her usual aura of invincibility had been stripped away. The board chair's authority had been dismantled piece by piece, carefully and legally, leaving her exposed for every violation she'd committed. The enforcer in crimson avoided my gaze entirely, while the clipboard queen's meticulous notes now served as evidence against her own leader. Even the tyrant in heels sat silent, forced to witness the aftermath of the reckoning she had enabled. I stepped outside onto the front steps of the courthouse, feeling the crisp air fill my lungs. The symbolic threshold, the front door of justice, was no longer just a concept. It was real, tangible, and victorious. Families passed by, neighbors waved, and I noticed Laura, our conflicted witness, standing quietly in the back. Her subtle nod confirmed what I already knew. The community's awareness and cooperation had been the key, the human thread that wove together this success. Without her, the plan would have lacked the crucial verification that turned suspicion into undeniable proof. Vanessa Caldwell and her enforcers were escorted out shortly after the verdict. The board chair's expression was a mix of disbelief and forced composure. The enforcer in crimson's posture slumped entirely. The clipboard queen looked down, shame replacing diligence. The tyrant in heels' usual smirk was gone, replaced by a rigid mask of irritation. The community had witnessed accountability executed with precision, and the ripple effect would extend beyond this single confrontation. Everyone present understood that the rules weren't abstract, they were enforceable, and misuse carried consequences. As I watched them depart, my thoughts turned to my son's bedroom, the space that had become a symbol of invasion and protection. The memory of that terrifying day, when Vanessa Caldwell crawled across the threshold of our private life, was still vivid, but now it was tempered with relief. His safety was no longer contingent on chance, and the neighborhood had learned a lesson in both boundaries and respect. The victory wasn't just personal, it was systemic. The HOA had been reminded that power over people's lives carried responsibility, and the reckoning had been swift and visible. I reflected on the process, the meticulous evidence gathering, the community coordination, the strategic patience, and realized it was more than just a legal victory. It was a narrative of empowerment, a lesson in standing firm when institutions overreach. The board chair's authority, the enforcer in Crimson's intimidation, the clipboard queen's obsessive oversight, and the tyrant in Heel's calculated pressure had all been met with clear, deliberate resistance. Each move had been countered thoughtfully, demonstrating that preparation, courage, and moral clarity could overcome even entrenched power structures. The neighbors lingered, sharing stories and reinforcing the bonds that had strengthened during the ordeal. The air carried an unspoken message. Vigilance, cooperation, and courage were now pillars of the community. Vanessa Caldwell's presence had diminished in impact, replaced by a shared understanding that no single person could unilaterally endanger the safety or peace of others. The symbolic objects, the closed doors, the bedroom threshold, the neighborhood pathways now represented security, vigilance, and respect restored. If you want more stories of homeowners standing up to HOA tyranny, hit subscribe right now, share your story in the comments, and let me know where you're watching from. This chapter ended, but the lessons endure. Preparation, community, and justice are never out of reach when confronted with overreach. Vanessa Caldwell's reign was over, and the neighborhood had regained its dignity, safety, and trust in a system that finally held power accountable.